The installation, this place that swallowed the horizon and crushed the sky, was always alive. I realize that now. Every thrum of its metallic heart, every whisper in its corroded halls, was the pulse of a creature older and more malevolent than I could have ever imagined. But I didn't understand that when I arrived. Back then, I was still clinging to the remnants of my old life, to the memory of my best friend and the life we had shared. A life that now felt as distant as a dream, slipping further away each day. When Mr. Green made his offer, it felt like a lifeline. Double the pay, hazard bonuses, a chance to escape the grief that had consumed me since my friend's death. But beneath the surface, I knew there was something darker. Green didn't care about my qualifications. He saw someone with no ties, no reason to say no. Deep down, I knew that too. My friend's voice echoed in my mind, warning me against taking the job. "Think it through," he would have said. "You don't need this." But I was desperate to get away from the memories, from the guilt gnawing at me. I convinced myself it was just work, just numbers, but even then, I think I knew I wasn't running away from my grief. I was running toward it. The helicopter ride to the installation was unnerving. We flew over an ocean that seemed endless, a cold, still grey expanse that mirrored the sky. Inside the helicopter, the air was thick with tension, and a metallic taste clung to the back of my throat. The other passengers were silent, their faces pale and drawn. We were told not to speak, a command that felt less like an instruction and more like a warning. One of the men across from me broke the silence, asking if it was my first time offshore. Before I could answer, the pilot turned slightly, and in the reflection of his visor, I saw eyes that were as empty and cold as the sea beneath us. My colleague went silent, shrinking back into his seat as if trying to disappear. I wanted to speak, to ask what he knew, but something held me back. A primal instinct that told me it was better to stay quiet. When the helicopter finally descended, the installation loomed out of the mist like a beast rising from the depths. It was massive, rusting, and covered in jagged edges that seemed ready to tear the sky apart. As I stepped out onto the platform, the ground trembled beneath my feet, as if the installation itself was waking up, sensing my presence. Harris was waiting for me. He was older than I expected, his face lined with age and something else. Resignation, maybe. Or exhaustion. He didn't waste time with introductions, just nodded and led me inside. "Keep your head down, and you'll be fine," he said, his voice flat. "And remember, whatever you see, whatever you hear, stays here." His words hung in the air long after he'd left me alone in the cold, sterile corridors. I knew then that this place was different, that it wasn't just an oil platform. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The first few days were a blur of spreadsheets and reports, but the unease I felt only grew stronger. The installation was alive, its heartbeat a constant thrum in the walls, a rhythm that I found myself unconsciously matching. The numbers that had once grounded me now felt like a code I couldn't crack, a puzzle with pieces missing. They appeared in strange places, etched into the walls, scrawled in the grime, even haunting my dreams. At night, I dreamed of my friend. His face became more indistinct with each passing day, his features blurring until he was just a shadow in my mind. In those dreams, we were back in our hometown, building a model plane together in his garage. But every time, something was different, a detail wrong, a piece out of place. Sometimes the plane was covered in rust. Other times, it bore unfamiliar numbers. The dream repeated night after night, warping as it went. His laughter turned into screams, the model plane's wings dripping with oil, its fuselage cracking open to reveal a gaping, rusted maw. When I woke, the taste of salt and rust lingered in my mouth, and the room seemed to close in around me. The numbers, once a source of order, began to mock me with their relentless presence. They were a constant reminder that I was losing myself, that the installation was stripping away my identity, piece by piece. Harris noted the change in me before I did. He began to seek me out more frequently, though our conversations were still brief and cryptic. One day, I confronted him, desperate for answers. "What is this place, Harris? Why does it feel like it's alive?" He looked at me for a long moment before replying, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. "This installation, it has a will of its own. It's been here longer than any of us, and it will be here long after we're gone. You need to understand that it's not just metal machinery. It's something more." "But what does it want?" I pressed. He shook his head, the lines on his face deepening. "It doesn't want. It just is, and it takes what it needs." There was something in his tone that unnerved me, something that hinted at a deeper understanding of the installation's true nature. I wanted to ask more, to push him for details, but the look in his eyes stopped me. There was a resignation there, a sense that he had long since made peace with whatever the installation demanded of him. And as much as I wanted answers, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear them. The other crew members avoided me. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, their eyes empty, their faces blank. They were a strange lot, silent, detached, as if they had already surrendered to the installation's will. I tried to talk to them, to ask questions, but they could only stare at me with those dead eyes before turning away, their mouths moving in silent, mechanical chants. The divers first appeared in my peripheral vision, shadows moving through the lower levels of the installation. They were unsettling, figures clad in diving suits, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. They moved with a grace that seemed impossible for beings so heavily encased in metal, gliding through the darkened corridors like phantoms. I watched them from the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. Something deep inside me warned me to stay away, but I couldn't look away. They disappeared into the lower decks, where the light barely reached, and the air was thick with the smell of rust and decay. I turned to leave but found Harris standing a few feet away, his eyes cold and knowing. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice as sharp as the rusted edges of the installation. "Get back to your quarters," he snapped. "Now!" I fled, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors, drowned out by the whispers that seemed to follow me wherever I went. But I couldn't stop thinking about the divers. The more I tried to push them from my mind, the more they consumed my thoughts. I scoured the installation for answers, searching the old logs and reports. but the information I found was fragmented at best. They were mentioned in passing, never explained, just shadows in the records, just like in the halls. Then, while searching a forgotten storage room, I found an old journal hidden behind a loose panel. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded, but the words were clear enough to read. The journal belonged to a former worker, someone who had been on the installation long before me. The entries were erratic, filled with paranoid ramblings about the divers. The writer described how the divers were not human, not anymore. They had been claimed by the installation, their bodies and minds twisted by the pit's influence. They were guardians, enforcers, ensuring that the crew followed the rituals, that no one stepped out of line. One passage stood out, sending chills down my spine. They were once like us, but the installation took them. It takes us all in the end. I see it now. See what they are. Their faces, their hands. I recognize them. Friends, colleagues, swallowed by this place, by the pit. They're watching me. I see them in my dreams. I hear them whispering in the walls, calling me to join them. It's only a matter of time. I realized then what I had been too afraid to admit. The installation had claimed my friend, just as it was claiming me. The man who had once been my closest companion was now one of them, a diver, a hollow shell of the person he once was, swallowed whole by this place. The crew's rituals became more frequent, more elaborate. They gathered in the depths of the installation, performing synchronized movements that were almost mechanical, their voices a monotone chant in a language I couldn't understand. They traced symbols in the air, symbols that I began to see in my dreams, glowing faintly in the darkness. The rituals were not just for show, they were necessary. Without them, the installation would consume us all. At first, I refused to join them, clinging to the belief that I could maintain my individuality, my sanity. But the pressure grew unbearable. The installation itself seemed to close in around me, its walls pulsing with a life of their own. I felt it in my bones, in my mind, the overwhelming force that demanded my submission. My thoughts fragmented, my memories of an outside world slipping away, replaced by the endless thrum of the installation. I joined the crew, performing the rituals with them, mimicking their movements, their chants. At first, it felt wrong, a betrayal of who I was. But over time, I found myself relying on the rituals to keep the darkness at bay. The installation's influence seeped into me, and I began to understand the symbols, the chants. The numbers that once haunted me became a guide, their patterns revealing the installation's will. As I fell deeper into the rhythms of the rituals, I noticed changes in my crew. Their skin grew pale, almost translucent, their eyes dull and lifeless. Their movements became more synchronized, more precise, as if they were no longer individual people, but extensions of the installation. Their rituals were stripping them of their humanity, and I knew it was happening to me too. But the rituals were never enough. The pit still called to me, its whispers growing louder, more insistent. I heard my friend's voice in the pit's whispers, urging me closer, telling me that the answers I sought lay within. I couldn't resist its pull any longer. Driven by a force I couldn't explain, I descended into the lowest levels of the installation, where the air was thick with the stench of rust and oil. The walls were slick, and the floors uneven, the light barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. The thumping in the walls had become a deafening roar, echoing in my mind, syncing with the frantic beat of my heart. The pit was there, at the center of it all, a vast yawning abyss that seemed to stretch on forever. It wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was a living thing, a mouth ready to swallow me whole. I felt its pull in my bones, in my very soul, drawing me closer, erasing the last remnants of my will. As I stood at the edge of the pit, teetering on the brink, I saw movement in the darkness. A figure emerged, clad in the familiar diving gear, the visor reflecting the faint light. A diver. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't just any diver. It was him. The diver reached out, and I noticed something. A small scar on his wrist, just visible through the torn glove. It was a scar that I'd seen 1,000 times, a reminder of a childhood accident, a mark my friend had carried with him ever since. My heart froze as the truth settled in, a truth I had been running from since the moment I arrived. My friend hadn't died. He had been taken, consumed by the installation, transformed into this hollow, mechanical shell. I should have been horrified, but instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. This was it. This was what I had been moving toward all along. The installation had always been a part of me, just as it had been part of him. My resistance crumbled, and I reached out, taking his hand in mine. In that moment, I felt the installation surge through me, its cold mechanical heart fusing with my own. The pit's whispers filled my mind, drowning out every thought, every memory, but I was no longer myself. I was part of something greater, something ancient, something that had existed long before I was born and would continue long after I was gone. The diver released my hand and stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the darkness, but I didn't follow. I turned away from the pit and faced the installation, my new home. The rusted walls pulsed with life, with numbers glowing faintly in the dim light. I was home. Harris found me the next day, standing at the edge of the pit, staring into the abyss. He didn't say anything, just nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. I didn't need words. I understood now. The installation had claimed another, and the cycle continued. I joined the crew's rituals without hesitation, my movements fluid, my voice steady. The numbers that once tormented me now guided me, their patterns clear and unyielding. The rust that spread across the installation was no longer a sign of decay, but of life, a sign of the installation's power. But something was different now, something deeper. As I moved through the corridors, I sensed the installation was not just a presence, but an extension of myself. The walls breathed with me, the metal thrummed with my heartbeat. I could feel the rust creeping beneath my skin, merging with my veins, turning my blood into cold metallic threads. I was becoming part of the installation in a way I hadn't imagined, in a way that transcended mere physical transformation. I began to see the world through the installation's eyes. The horizon wasn't just a line, it was a boundary, a limit that the installation had to push against, expand beyond. The sea wasn't just water, it was a source of life, a wellspring of energy that fed the installation's endless hunger. And the crew, the people who had once been my colleagues, were no longer individuals. They were cells in a larger organism, each one playing a role, each one vital to the installation's survival. When new workers arrived, I greeted them with the same calm detachment that Harris had once shown me. I saw the fear in their eyes, the confusion, and I knew it wouldn't be long before they understood the truth. I had become what I once feared, a man who had surrendered to the installation, who had become a part of something far greater than himself. There was no fear in that realization, only acceptance. Because when the installation decides, there's no escape. It will find you, and it will take you, just as it took so many before. As I sit in my quarters, the thumping in the walls syncing with the beat of my heart, I realize that the installation has consumed me, body and soul. The man I once was, an accountant who sought order and control, is gone, replaced by something else, something that understands the rhythms of this place, the hunger that drives it. And when my time comes, I won't resist. I will go willingly, just as those before me have. But now, I understand what that means on a level I hadn't before. The installation is not just a machine, nor just a predator. It's a force, a presence that transcends the physical, something that exists outside of time and space. It's a part of the universe's fabric, a manifestation of the endless cycle of creation and destruction. To become part of the installation is to lose oneself completely, to surrender every trace of individuality, every memory, every thought. It is to become a vessel for something ancient and unknowable, something that has existed since the dawn of time and will continue long after the stars have burnt out. It is to be consumed, body and soul, by the hunger that drives the universe itself. And in that realization, there is a strange comfort, because in surrendering to the installation, I am no longer alone. I am no longer just one man, isolated and afraid. I am part of something greater, something that will never die, never fade away. And when the installation finally takes me, when the rust has spread through every part of my being, I will become one with it. I will become the walls, the floors, and the thrum of the heartbeat. I will become the numbers etched into the metal, the symbols traced in the air. I will become the installation itself, and in that, I will find peace, because that's just the way it is.